Water is clearly listed in the FTA under Article 711 of the Agriculture Chapter. This heading in the tariff schedules, a legal part of the FTA, reads, "Waters including natural or artificial mineral waters and aerated waters, ice, and snow." If Canada ships water to the U.S., water will be subject to the same provisions as all other goods. Which is to say, even if Canada faces a shortage, it will be obliged to supply to the U.S. the same proportion of its total supply that the Americans were taking over the previous 3 years. Also, the FTA has given the U.S. national treatment rights to all Canadian waters, thereby giving it substantial new rights to Canada's water. The provinces constitutionally have large jurisdiction over all natural resources, including water. If a province made a deal with the U.S., how would the federal government stop it? If a Canadian government takes any action to promote or protect cultural industries in a way that alters U.S. control of these industries in Canada, the Americans have the legal right to estimate their losses from the measure, and then take action of equal value against another Canadian industry without even having to go through the dispute settlement panel. For example, if Canada took steps to increase Canadian films' access to theaters or to increase Canadian content on television, the U.S. would have the right to retaliate against any other Canadian industry it chose, be it lumber, steel, pork, fish, or automobiles.
Assuring our cultural integrity is very much connected to maintaining our economic independence in Canada. We're losing, as you pointed out, many of our best and brightest because the headquarters of many of our key industries are outside the country. If you want to be a major film producer, where are you going to go? People go to Hollywood because that's where the industry is. 97% of the movies shown in theaters in Canada are foreign, mostly American. So we grew up not seeing our culture reflected, our history reflected, our comedy reflected on our screens, watching foreign films, and then our film directors go to where the headquarters of the industry are. We could have a film industry in Canada. In fact, we have excellent films made in Canada, but they're not shown here because we don't own the theater chains in which to show them. You've got little countries like Finland, Norway, Australia, an English-speaking country, smaller than we are, but has a much more vibrant domestic film industry. Again, it's a question of having some kind of national policy, and if we had that kind of national policy, we would have those minds staying here in Canada. We have to have a reflection of our culture on our screens, whether you're talking about music, videos, films, the whole sweep. I did a lot of research on the whole issue when I was writing my book about what's happened to our hockey games. We've got even the Montreal Canadiens, the Quebec Nordiques, the Vancouver Canucks, all owned outside in foreign hands. I come from Saskatchewan. When Saskatoon wanted to have a national hockey league, our city fathers had to go to St. Louis and ask the American directors whether they could please have a hockey team, and they were given the back of the hand, even though this was once our game. So this idea that we could have all of these things, but it requires a little bit of national will.
The impact of the FTA on Native people in Canada has not been adequately understood. The federal government is promising Canada's First Nations greater control over their land and futures through self-government. This is an empty promise. Reserve and band level governments, that is, local governments, are bound by every article of the FTA, including the resource commitments to the U.S. in Articles 408, 409, 903, and 904. The agreement ends any hope Native people have for authentic self-government with control of their resources. Since Article 401 abolishes all tariffs, there will no longer be any penalty to force companies to produce vehicles in Canada. The Auto Pact remains on paper, but the enforcement mechanism is gone. Prior to the FTA, the Auto Pact had a 60% Canadian content requirement for automobiles assembled in Canada. Under Annex 301.2 of the FTA, the Canadian content rule is abolished and replaced with a 50% North American content rule, which means that the whole 50% can now come from the U.S. Today, the auto industry in Canada is well over 90% foreign-owned. Canada is the only major car market in the world without its own car. Canadians have repeatedly been told that Canada is too small to have its own auto industry. In fact, Canada is a large market. 1.4 million cars and trucks with a value of $19 billion are sold annually. How Sweden, South Korea, Japan, Germany, France, and other countries can produce and market their own successful automobiles is apparently a mystery.
The Japanese had this debate. In 1954, Canada and Japan had the same size economy. The Japanese had a debate about, in fact, Canada produced more automobiles than the Japanese. The Japanese government decided to foster an electronics industry and an automotive industry. There was a roaring debate. The free traders, if I can call them that, said, how could Japan ever build an industry that could compete with the United States? As we all know, the government persevered, and by the late 1980s, Japan was outproducing the United States in terms of automobiles, and its electronics industry is known worldwide. So if a little country like Japan, you could fit into southern Ontario here, with its resources can do it, think of what we could do with the resources we have here in Canada.
The FTA contains 140 articles. The examples given in our program by no means cover all of them. Here are a few more. Article 401 provides for the elimination of tariffs on all goods by 1998. Before the Free Trade Agreement, Canada's tariffs were, on average, 3 times higher than those of the U.S. The equal elimination of each country's tariffs amounts to a threefold advantage to the United States. Chapter 6, Technical Standards, states, each party shall make compatible its standards-related measures and procedures for product approval with those of the other party. The repercussions are serious for Canada's sovereignty in terms of its ability to set and enforce national standards of its own choosing. Article 2011, called Nullification and Impairment, gives the U.S. the ammunition to challenge Canada on virtually any social and economic policy it doesn't like. In effect, Washington has achieved a veto over future Canadian policy decisions. Technically, this measure is reciprocal, but Canada's ability to impose its will on Washington is, in this regard, non-existent. Chapter 15, Temporary Entry for Business Persons, allows a long list of over 40 occupational categories to enter Canada for unspecified lengths of time without the usual immigration requirements. Again, this measure is reciprocal, but the difference in population size makes Canadians 10 times more vulnerable to being swamped with American competition.